Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. And this time, I'm very glad to have back my guest, Terry Trahan. Terry, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Wim?
I am excellent. I'm very happy that you agreed to come on the podcast again. And for those of you who have not been long-time listeners, first of all, shame on you. And second, you can listen to the first interview I did with Terry. That's episode number 10. Go to wimsblog.com/10, and you can listen to it there. So, also, Terry and I go way back. We've known each other for we get old, it's a few decades now. We first got in touch when I had my old site before I had my blog. My first site is what my blog basically morphed into over the years, and I did a book review of one of Mark McYoung's books, and you were in there, and I called you Mr.
Yeah.
Black. So to me, you're always Mr. Black.
Yeah. The Delphi forums for the KSMA.
Right, right. That's a long time ago.
Yeah. And started out there, and all these years later, I'm the director of the KSMA now.
Cool.
So
It's weird how this kind of stuff goes.
yeah.
I mean, over the time we've seen a bunch of big forums come and go, like forums that were like the place to be for discussion.
Self-defense forums. I was, one of the moderator team on that, and then it blew up. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got my own Facebook group now, and the reason I call it the name is "You Are Not Aries," and the reason I call it that is that just you're not the god of war. When you come in here, bring some humility and some understanding that you don't know everything. That includes me as a moderator. We've got a bunch of rules that are, mostly inspired by Mark's email list rules from back in the day. I added some of my own. Just somebody left because they didn't want to agree to the rules. I said, look, you just have to agree. And like they left. Like, okay, you don't want to have an honest conversation. Bye-bye.
exactly.
So it's anyway, we are not spring chickens, dear listeners and viewers. We're going to get into it now. So this episode is about the life. How did this get started? Well, a while ago, I posted something on my Facebook page, a link to a Twitter post I retweeted of a video, and I'll put links to all this kind of stuff in the show notes. And it's a video of this young black kid in the street. What was he, 5 years old, 6 years old, maybe?
Yeah.
And he is just cussing at a police officer and trying to hit him and this and that. Police officer obviously is not doing anything. But I mean, that kid was what I said, it's a lost cause. And what I said is, as Mark likes to say, the skills you need to survive in the life are not the same as those you need to get out of the life. It seems unlikely this child will develop the latter, which is a tragedy for both the child and the society it lives in. And then I said, like, the odds that kid doesn't make 21, they're pretty high. And if he does make it, it's going to take 10 to 15 years at least to get the necessary skills to get out of that environment. That's a huge waste of time because these are supposed to be some of the most productive years of a human's life.
Yeah.
And also my point was that if you didn't grow up in such a culture where this kind of violence, whether it's verbal or physical, is like on a fundamental level, it's integrated in your daily life, it's kind of difficult to see it coming if you didn't grow up like that. And you, Terry, you responded with, I started trying to get out of the life around 30 years old. It took till my early mid-40s to make noticeable progress, and I still went back a few times. And that was with great support. Most people don't get that support at all. So that is the reason why we are having this talk, because I asked you if you were willing to come on the podcast and talk about the life a little bit. First of all, I mean, again, this for the listeners, this is a very personal topic, obviously, to you. And it's in large part it's a private topic as well. So this is not me going to be prying to get every little tidbit out of Terry's brain. It's just me having a conversation with a friend about an aspect of life and violence and culture that a lot of people only know in the movies and often isn't really portrayed realistically. With all that said as an intro, could you just give maybe your explanation? What is the life?
So over the years of talking about it, I've come up with it's a very twisted definition, but it's anything outside of what the norm is for the majority of people. Could be criminal, doesn't necessarily have to be criminal, but anything outside of that norm that people, and the twisted part of it is it's also things that people, normal, quote unquote, people fantasize about. You know, they want to be the tough guy. They want to be, you know, the military guy. It's anything outside of that norm and anything that they fantasize about. In reality, on the streets, the life is just how you get by when you are, I hate to use a lot of the modern terms, but you know, you're poor socioeconomically, you don't have a whole lot of options, and quite possibly you grew up in an environment, and this is the big one, an environment where violence is an acceptable tool. And alongside the violence, there's a certain comfort level with screwing people over or lying to get your way, or, you know, which once again is outside the norms of what people are raised with, but it's your lifestyle. And it's, the life makes it sound like there's a place you all go to gather and hang out, and you're all, you know, the Pirates Den or the Thieves Club or whatever. And that's not it. It's a bunch of individuals doing this stuff, and a bunch of individuals fighting to get their way and to make their way.
Yeah, that's a good definition. I think Mark in his early writings talked about, you know, the trash can of society.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like that because it's a very easy image to get. It's that, you know, for whatever reason, for a bunch of reasons, actually, you end up in the trash can of society, and that society puts the people there. And it's not like somebody physically necessarily puts you there. It's a variety of reasons you end up in, let's call it a subculture for people who understand that better, a subculture of society where the rules are different.
Yep.
It's not that there are no rules, it's that they're different. And like you said, it doesn't have to be criminal, but very often you will be in contact with people who act in a criminal way or are actually, you know, professional criminals.
Right.
And when I mean professional, I don't mean that they are, you know, they have their shit wired tight. Oh yeah, everybody, we're going to swear like a lot, so be warned. It's not that they are the most effective, it's just that that's what they do. They don't have a regular job. They get by whether it's scamming people, whether it's robbing people, it could be a bunch of illegal things, but that's how they live. They might actually be on disability, they might be on welfare or at the same time, but they live a very, very different life.
Yes.
So that's the kind of, just to, you know, explain a little in a slightly different way for people who might understand that better. Could you give some examples, or maybe, you know, sketch out a little bit, how did you end up in the life? And again, this is as far as you're comfortable talking about this.
Basically, kind of a rough childhood, teenage years. I started kind of going off the rails a little bit, but then there were a few significant events that happened, and I ended up just basically saying, "Fuck it, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want, how I want, when I want." And I had already developed kind of a proclivity for using the skills that I started, you know, fighting and stuff like that. And I just kept getting deeper and deeper into it. I also, a lot of people who go the violence route in the life have a few things different in your head. You can either compartmentalize really well, or there's some that lack a total sense of empathy for what you're doing to somebody. So it makes it easier. It's not like you can just flip a switch and walk in and, oh, hey, here, I'm a bouncer or whatever, right? For me, I kept on, a lot of it was based on disappointment in things that had happened in my life. If you want to boil it down to, you know, I was born poor. We were kind of in that subculture of not destitute poverty, but, you know, assistance for housing and stuff like that. So that's one subculture that I was in. And I grew up around a bunch of like the blue collar factory worker, biker, where violence is a little more accepted. Grew up in a military town. Once again, violence is a little more accepted. So all that stuff kind of mixed together to make me kind of what I was. And the more disappointed in things I became, the further into that existence I threw myself. Culminated after several years, I gave up on everything and just basically voluntarily became homeless. I would live under a bridge or in a car or in a hotel room or shack up with some people for a little while or whatever. Um, Mine was always driven by I don't care and I don't like what's going on. I don't want to be around anything. That was probably the hardest part, the first step to try to get out of. Because once you exile yourself, like Mark said, people throw you in the trash can. When you throw yourself in the trash can, it's even harder to get out. And that was the first significant hurdle to doing it. And in that process, I make a joke out of it, but I tried to go straight by becoming a bouncer in a topless bar run by bikers. Right. That was my first attempt at stepping back into the world. So that should tell you kind of what the background that goes into that kind of thinking is. If I think I'm going straight by working in a drug infested alcoholic emporium with a bunch of topless girls, but it also introduced me to a bunch of different levels of the life. There's your drug dealers, there's your part-time drug dealers, there's the people who just want to do it to party. That's all three different levels of being in the life. So it's way more wide ranging than people think. And it doesn't have necessarily the dark connotations that people think.
Could you expand on that last part a little bit? So when you say it doesn't necessarily have the dark connotations, because what I often see is that people then, for instance, they get a taste of life and they don't yet end up in the dark places. And it's like, this is awesome. This is so much more fun than regular society. It's like, yeehaw, I'm all in. So could you maybe give some examples of what, I wouldn't call it the good side, but the non-dark side?
The people who, party drugs, stripper parties, whorehouses, it takes a long time of living that every day before you start degrading into somebody who will not be able to come out without a lot of help. But, to this day, I abstain from pretty much everything now. But I still don't see the problem with people going somewhere and adjusting their mentality and taking some substances to deal with life. That's, not necessarily a good part, but that's a good part of the life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Well, people take substances for a variety of reasons. I think it's a complex issue in and of itself. I think we've learned a lot more about all the different, illegal drugs that are out there that it used to, like 20, 30 years ago, everybody was like, nope, bad, period. And now, from a lot of the research that I've seen, there's a lot of actual promise in psychedelics for treatment of many, many mental disorders, and psychological issues, trauma, and what PTSD and what have you. So it's not black and white. And what I can imagine is that a bunch of people gravitate towards the life simply because that's what they find, is that it's a way to manage their pain, their trauma, their problems.
And how do I put this? There's a level of acceptance there from other people that you don't really find in normal, polite society, so to speak. People, don't ever forget that there's rules that you have to follow depending on what section of the life you're in. But people are overwhelmingly more accepting of your fuck ups and proclivities and how you come across than you find like on a normal 9-to-5 job or, a boardroom.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the attraction for a bunch of people who come from, let's say, regular society and end up in the life, is that it looks like at first that there's no rules because, like you said, you don't necessarily get the same response if you act a little bit out of pocket and that you would in regular society. It's easy to start thinking that there actually are no rules and then all of a sudden run headfirst into a wall.
Then you meet somebody like me whose job is to enforce the rules.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk maybe a little bit about the darker side then. So we covered what people call the attraction, and then they end up there, and let's say somebody fucks up one times too many, and they start to encounter the dark side. Let's start with, for instance, what your job was to set them straight. and maybe give some examples of what else is in the dark side.
Well, okay, so what my job in various levels, various forms or whatever, I was always kind of a bouncer, enforcer, whatever you want to call it. My job was to make sure people did what they said they would do or punish them for not, or for violating the rules. The reason why that is an actual like job is because in the life, you don't have outside enforcement of rules. You don't have a police force that runs around saying, hey, no, you can only snort 2 lines tonight, not 3, you know? So it falls on people. And that's where the first step in the dark side, I think you can really see, is people who enjoy hurting other people have a tendency to try to be that.
Yeah.
And it's a big attraction. We've talked a lot in both like on the list and at the barbecue and stuff about the attraction and the addiction to the violence. And it's not just an addiction to the adrenaline that happens. It's an addiction to the whole thing. You never feel more alive. You never feel more powerful. You never fear for your life as much, which is its own thing. And that has a really bad tendency to twist a lot of people. And that's where you start getting the freaks and the weirdos, and what a lot of people probably think is a larger percentage of the population of the life incorporated. The other bad parts are when you get in too deep and everything in the life is transactional. It's very rare that people do things out of the goodness of their own heart. There's always an expectation of a return. And if you can't make that return, you have to make that return in another way. What was that? Less Than Zero, when Robert Downey Jr. was so addicted to drugs that he, how that ended up having to happen. He had to blow guys at a party to pay off his debt. That's the dark side. And that's what a lot of people see. And yes, it does happen. But there's a lot of stop signs and, hey, buddy, cool out. You need to, before you get to that point.
Yeah. And I think that's a good example. Like you said, a famous person. I mean, because RDJ was like, he was on his way to be one of the best actors of his generation. And he basically, dropped into a black hole and disappeared into it. I mean, he managed to get out of it, and good for him. And he found one of the things he does Wing Chun for a long time. Actually, I've seen him train. He's not that bad, and that seems to give him some stability. But also, he comes from this weird background. But his father was also like this creative type, and I think they grew up in New York in like the movie making part of or theater. I don't remember. I remember him talking about that. And I mean, imagine being that guy, being famous for doing Chaplin and all those movies, and then you end up at a party and like, dude, time to pay off your debt. Get to it. I'm sure a lot of people don't know about that part. So you might have just shocked half the audience.
Yeah, there's a real life example of it. The last bar that I worked at, where I met Jay, we had a couple bike clubs that hung out there, motorcycle clubs, biker gangs, I guess people call them still. And there was one of the members there, and if you didn't owe him anything, he was the nicest guy in the world, but if you owed him something and you didn't pay it back, he would film porno videos with your old lady and mail them to you. That's kind of, that shit happens. But it also engenders a shitload of personal responsibility to not get that far.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point about, not just the life, but also how many criminals think, in that, like you said, everything's transactional. Nothing is given for free. That includes the truth. Speaking truthfully. Information is just another way of getting leverage or putting somebody in your debt, which means that, by definition, they will not tell you the truth necessarily. Which
all the studies that come out.
Go ahead.
All the studies that come out of prison about how criminals think and how they behave, especially juveniles, don't believe but maybe 20% of the freaking answers, because if you're in that and you're already in an institution where they're asking you questions for a survey, you've already been exposed to all that, and you already know how to twist the answers to get what you want, because when you do those surveys, you get benefits while you're in,
Yep.
and yeah, truth and honesty is a currency.
Exactly, and that's the point I wanted to make. And this is, again, we're mainly recording this. I mean, we talked about this beforehand. There's two reasons why we're doing this. So the first one is to educate people, or educate is not the right word, but just give information about what it was like for people who are not in the life and who just want to know more. So we want to dispel some of the myths and some of the nonsense, but also people who end up listening to this, who are in the life right now and want to get out. Like, you're an example that it's possible, and just, and we'll get to that part, just talk about what it takes to get out. And the way I see it, kind of, not to get too corny, but maybe a little bit of a message of hope for people when it's really dark around you, is that, there might be a little light. There might be a way to get out of there. And like you said, is that it took you a lot of effort with a support system to get out. So imagine if you got nothing. So if they hear this American guy and this silly Belgian guy talking about the life, and that gives them a little bit of a spark of a hope, I'll be happy. But that's just me. That's being the optimist right now, which is rare for me. So that was it. We're done.
I'm glad to see it.
There was one thing I wanted to ask, and because you made a good point here, and now because I'm going off on a tangent, it's gone. I will get it back, but it's gonna take a while. The main thing I wanted to say about the idea of, and you touched upon it. So when you said you talked about these studies, I see it when you read those studies. I see it when you hear politicians talk about criminals, when you hear activists, nonprofits, and so on talking about, we need to help these people and this and that. I had somebody come on my page years ago, and it was like, I forget what it was about. I think it was about some crime. I don't remember. But I said, look, you are responsible for yourself at the end of the day. We all have agency, regardless of your background, of where you came from, what horrors that fell upon you in your life. You still are your own person, and it's your responsibility to manage your own life, not somebody else. And the answer that person gave was, yeah, but you can't use a tool that you don't have. So it's like, if you kind of saying, like, if nobody teaches you how to do that, you can't do it. I was like, this is bullshit. The reason why we are the apex predator on this freaking planet is because we create our tools. We need a tool, we make it.
One of the big, and this will come in later, but one of the biggest benefits and biggest steps out that I had was, you can learn by observation, and you can learn by watching people. And on top of all the other, you can't use a tool you don't have, the library's fucking free.
Yeah.
And there's one in every city. You can find the tools that you need, and you can find help just by watching people.
Yeah. And that was kind of my point as well. This grates me, when with all the postmodernism we have in society nowadays, and everybody's a victim and this and that. Yes, it's true. I mean, it's horrible for those people who are victimized for a variety of reasons. That's not the point, though. If there's something that I think is fundamentally true, it is that by having people wallow in their victimhood, you don't do them any service. It doesn't help them. Doesn't mean that you have to just say, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's not what okay, that's too easy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of that needs to go in it. If you want to get out of the life, you were born into it, okay, but you're going to have to do the work, which is what you always say. So do the work.
Yeah. There's no other way. You can have people hold their hand out to help you pull up, but unless you start climbing, it ain't going to happen. And I wanted to backtrack a little bit. We were talking about I was talking about how the life is not stereotypical like what people think. But one thing that's happening, I notice nowadays, is it's becoming an actual thing, because of our exposure to like movies and movies and fiction, more and more people are living like that and aping it. And so it becomes harder to make those observations because, you know, you have your people who put up a front and they're not really that, and they take attention, and you don't get a good way of looking at it to get out. It's, you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you're honestly making that effort and trying and you haven't totally fucked up your life, there will always be people there to try to help you. There's just no no way around that. You're always you're gonna find what you need if you work for it.
I think Mark made that point, you know, a long time ago, and I think it's such an important point, is that there's a difference between blame and responsibility. It's not the same thing. It's not your fault necessarily that you end up in the life or that you end up being victimized. Nobody's saying it's your fault, but you do have a responsibility because nobody else can do it for you. For instance, people who struggle with substance abuse, I think pretty much everybody who has worked at helping them, you know, kick that habit, they will tell you that the person has to want it first. Because if they don't want to get off drugs or alcohol or whatever, you can't help them. They have to take the necessary steps. They have to do the work. They have to show up at the meetings and do all that stuff. If they don't want to, if they don't feel like it, it doesn't matter what you as a professional, as a support group, as a sponsor, whatever, everybody else can do. As long as they're not on board, it's not going to happen.
Yep.
Let's expand upon that truth, which I think is a truth, to everything else. Whatever the situation is that is fucked up, whatever, you know, is happening or happened to you that you end up victimized, it's still on you, no matter how hard it is to take action. That does in no way, shape, or form imply that it's easy, or that there won't be ups and downs, that you'll fall 15 times to get up again.
Yep.
That's absolutely not what it is, but it's your responsibility. Somebody else's fault, maybe, that you end up like that, but nobody can do it for you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. The very first base step you have to make is the decision in your head to say, no, I'm not doing that. Whether it's a little thing or it's a big thing, the first step is saying, no, that's taking responsibility. That's acknowledging that it's in your power to not let that happen or to not participate in whatever. You have to without taking responsibility, all you do is you walk forward 2 steps and back 5.
Yeah.
You know, because without taking responsibility, you don't stop whatever was going on in the background that made you be where you are. You don't stop that. You have to take that off and put it away before you can go forward. And the first step is saying, no, I'm done. I'm going to change. And it helps if you know it's going to be a long journey. I didn't. I thought I can switch. Yeah. And you were there through some of that, through some of the problems that I had. I thought, boom, it's a light switch. I can just stop doing what I was doing. No, but I took that responsibility and I said, no, I'm not going to be like that anymore. And everything fell from that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think that's something, it's so hard for people to understand that it's not a switch. And I think a large part of it is maybe, for instance, what I've noticed with a lot of men who end up in the life is that they've got a lot of anger in them, in particular against specific people, society in general. You know, for instance, society discards them. It's one of those things that is hard to understand, especially when you're younger, is that certain things will make you, will close certain doors for you forever. For instance, you end up with a rap sheet.
Yeah.
You go to prison for whatever. That means you got a sheet. That means that when you apply for the job, that's going to show up. Try getting a job in a bank. See what happens. It's out. That door is closed for you. You end up with your face covered in tattoos, with holes in your face, in your ears and everything. some of that stuff is never going to go away, no matter how much you try. Same
Yep.
thing. Try to get a job in a bank. It's not going to happen.
Try to get a job in a retail place.
Yep.
And I'm experiencing my first couple of years actually working retail. It's opened up my eyes to a lot and helped me solidify some of my theories. But
And before we go on, sorry to interrupt you, Terry. Could you shout out the name, and I'll put a link in the show notes where you work.
Cutting Edge Gifts, CE Blades. Our website is ceblades.com. And we're just a small town knife store, but we have stuff that you won't find anywhere else.
Excellent.
I might have been around the knife world for a while.
I was just going to say, for the people listening who don't know Terry, if I have a question about a knife, Terry would be like the first person I would ask. And if you think you know knives, I'm pretty sure that there's a bunch of stuff that you don't know that Terry's forgotten already. So, if he says we've got stuff nobody else has, I think you can bet on that.
So I was thinking about it and talking about it with one of my employees the other day, and Jay and I talk about it a lot. It's been about 20 years I've been professionally employed in the knife world somehow, whether it's, Boker and Spyderco, or doing seminars, or now running the stores or whatever. I've got a bit of a background in it. And then all the years before that made me know what I knew to get into so yeah.
Yeah. So like you said, try to get a job in retail if you've got, born to lose tattooed on your forehead. It's not going to happen. And this is, I think, also a big aspect of you end up in the life and you say, screw you to society, which, you might have all the rights to do that, meaning that you might be justified in saying so because society or somebody screwed you over, like what you said is like, I'm done. Like, I don't care anymore. Yes. Okay. And the consequences of that and the choices you make in that frame of mind can make it extremely difficult to get out. And whether it's your appearance, whether it's something else, it makes it very, very difficult. For instance, there's something that I'd like to ask you about: language, the way you speak, the way you talk. Could you talk a little bit about the differences between regular society and the life?
Great example. So Mark McYoung, way back, it was either 97 or 98. He was doing a women's self-defense seminar in Castle Rock, and I came down to help him. And we're going through and we're doing the intros. You introduce yourself before the group of people. And it's all like middle class, upper class, Castle Rock, like, soccer moms and stuff. I stick out like a sore thumb already because I still have the long hair and the skull earring and the leather vest, the whole 9 yards. And Mark gets up and, I'm Mark McYoung. They call me Animal. I wrote these books and did these videos and da-da-da-da-da. Diana gets up and, I'm Diana. I stood up and said, hi, I'm Terry. I work in a titty bar. And I lost half the crowd at that moment. The other half the crowd went, but what was common knowledge and how to speak in my life was totally out of the norm for the situation I'm in. And I think that goes there. Somebody wrote something about code switching or whatever. That's the biggest part. Language is a big clue as to where somebody comes from. But the ability to switch back and forth, which I can really do now. I can, be at my work, running one of my stores, dealing with like regular, normal customers, talking to them how they want to be. Somebody fucks up, like tries to steal something or something. I can talk to them how they understand and go back. Use of language, like we were talking about, information is a tool, is a currency. Use of language is how you spend that currency.
Yeah. Could you give some examples of that? Just whatever comes to mind. Just, the main thing for me, it's mostly for the listener who has no clue as to what that means. So if we can make it like a concrete example.
So in normal middle class church going upbringing, to say fuck you to somebody is it's an insult. Whereas, and it's so common now, it's a joke, but in New York, it's how you say good morning. Yeah. You just have to make sure you're doing it in the right circles and the right circumstances. you and I can go back and forth and tease each other about things because we have a 20 some odd year history. Whereas if someone else called you a big Belgian blonde bastard, you know, it might have a different meaning.
Yeah.
So, and also not just what you say and how you say it, but what words you choose to use. I spend a lot of time refining, and especially my written stuff. I try to really be more eloquent and everything because it makes me think. It makes me refine what I'm writing, but it bleeds over into my use of language, and that really helps me not be what I was. I've always been pretty well read. I started reading at a really young age, and that has helped with my understanding of language and everything. But when I make an effort to use $5 words and whatnot, that's when I really notice that I'm making good progress, or I'm maintaining where I need to, because it means you think about what you're doing.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure that I feel like I'm kind of rambling in my mind, and then my point's not coming out. But language is a several layered thing, and there's the obvious, don't call somebody a cocksucker unless you're ready to go, right? Whereas the de-escalation does not involve the word cocksucker until it does. And I have examples of when it worked, right? On the other hand, don't try to explain to somebody who's not on that level using college level words.
Yeah.
But the corollary of that is don't condescend to them by trying to use the same words they do. Just find a lower way to speak to them.
Yeah.
Because you get in just as much trouble trying to talk under somebody and condescend to them than you do talking down to them.
I think that's a really good point. Just because somebody doesn't have a huge vocabulary doesn't mean they're stupid and that they don't get that you're talking down to them. I've seen a fair number of people use their intellect like that because I'm so much smarter than you, and this and that, and what are you going to do? And they don't understand that the response from those people who are in the life is that you are disrespecting me. I'm going to freaking punch your head off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hit you really, really hard and then kick you in the nuts a few times and then maybe break something. That's the proper response in my life.
Yeah. I due to a bad night of partying one time, and this was a long, long time ago, I lost my wallet and my driver's license and everything was in there. So I had to go apply for a new ID card, new driver's license. So I went into the place, and I think I'm the only person in the history of Denver that got kicked out of the same driver's license bureau place like 3 times. This was the first time. And the guy who I was talking to goes, well, I need to see ID for you to get an ID. And I looked at him, and I'm hungover and whatever. I'm in a bad mood. I said, if I had ID, I wouldn't be here trying to get an ID. Your job is to help me. And he kept on, he was the condescending thing. And so right there, boom, live on security cam and everything, give me my fucking ID. And so obviously I wasn't allowed there anymore, But that shows the difference in language, the difference in response to when somebody is condescending to you, because that's what set me off.
Yeah.
And it's still a trigger for me. I have to watch that. If people are unintentionally coming across that way, I still get fucking angry.
Yeah. And this brings us, immediately back to where we started with that video of that young kid who is just cussing up a storm and being physically aggressive towards that cop. Like just the body language, the puffing of the chest, the actual hitting of that cop for that kid, that is life. That is how you act. That is how you think. That's just how it's going to be. He was maybe 5 or 6 years old. Imagine in 10 years when he's big and strong.
5 years from now when he's old enough to hold a gun.
Yeah. Which is another of those things. Like if you go some of the places in the US now, they're not even 10 years old, and they're carrying. And it might be this crappy revolver that might just as well blow up in their hands, but they're packing, and they have. It's like that's why I bring up that kid again. That kid, let's say in 5 years' time, he's 10 years old. he's got a revolver, and it might not be a good one. All he needs is one shot, and you, for whatever reason, in his head, disrespect him, he's not going to have an issue pulling that trigger. It's going to happen, which is for so many people, that's like, no, that can't happen. Kids aren't like that. Yes, kids are like that. Yes, and they always have been, by the way, throughout human history.
Yep. You know, it shocks somebody when I tell this particular story, but when I first got the job at the knife store, when I was just a sales clerk, I you have a rule: you can't sell to people who, weapons to people who aren't 18, right? Um, so I was telling this kid that, no, I can't sell it to you. And he spit in my face. And both of us knew he knew what he was doing. I knew what he was doing. But the response that came out, I reached up and grabbed his cart by the neck, squeezing his jugular and pulling it. If you do that again, I'm going to fucking kill you. And he knew what was, but my coworker was totally freaked out.
Yeah.
You know, we were communicating. My coworker was like, what the fuck? you know?
Yeah, and this is a perfect example. It's like, in the life, that is the appropriate response. You do not let that stand. You can't let that stand, not from that kid. Which for the average person is going to sound so horrible. It's like, oh my God, and he's just a child. But it doesn't matter if he's just a child. Because that child
The
might
fact
actually
that I
kill you.
could reach out straight and grab him, he was a kid, but he wasn't little,
Yeah. I'm going to bring it back to language. I'll give an example so we can talk about a different aspect of it. It's not just how people talk, it's the way they engage you in conversation. What I really liked is Elmore Leonard, who is an excellent writer, and he is famous for his dialogue. The people who've seen Justified, the TV show with Raylan Givens, the U.S. Marshal, that's based on his books. He's written so much more. Great writer, especially the dialogue it sounds so true to life, especially if you've got some experience with criminals. And apparently what he did was go sit in court and just listen to criminals talk. And that was apparently one of the things he did. It might not be true regardless. He's got a really, he's got an ear for dialogue. He was a great writer. And if you read some of his work, for me, it was so triggering in the sense that it's just like, fucking hell, I know guys like that. And there's one example where I lived. It was okay when I started living in my apartment after my divorce, but it was never bad. But over the years, some people started moving in who were on their way to the life or, already in it. No criminals, but just people who are, they were messing up their lives. And one of my neighbors, he was a police officer to boot. He was a raging alcoholic. And how would I know? Well, I would see him take out the trash and with all the bottles and the beer cans. He would, he'd be wasted trying to get up the stairs, not once, not twice, but like pretty much every day of the week. He had a cousin who came to live with him for a while. All of a sudden, I get, somebody calling me, ringing my doorbell, and I go down. It's like, yes, can I help you? I'm like, okay, we're looking for this guy. Is he with you? No, he's staying with that guy across the hall. Oh, okay, yeah, because he owes us money. And that were people who were his employer, who had given him an advance on his wages in the beginning of the week, and he never showed up again. So that was that story. So fast forward a few weeks, and I'm in my garage in the back of the apartments, working out on my heavy bag. The way that the garages were structured is that it's a big open area where everybody can drive around, and then you can't miss it when I'm working out. It's behind the building, but that guy shows up, and I see him right away, and I'm like, okay, here we go. So he starts immediately with this big story. Oh, you martial arts. I used to do a bit of that as well. Can I train him a little bit? I said, no, I don't do that. My standard answer. I've had some bad experiences letting people use my stuff, so I kind of do mind. It's okay, this and that, and bit by bit he goes into this big story of him having no money and having to take the bus to this and that, and then the ask comes, and he's like, could you spot me for like $5. I don't remember what it was. I'll get it back to you tomorrow. And that was basically the whole thing. It took about 4 to 5 minutes to get there. And because he's living, across the hall, I'm like, I'm not going to be an asshole and tell him to fuck off right away. But he needs to get the message that you are not going to fuck with me, because I know what this is, what this is. So he asks, and I said, you know what? You might be a good guy. I don't know you. You don't know me. I've had bad experiences with loaning money to people. I'm not going to do that. And I stopped talking and looked him straight in the eye. And yeah, I can respect that. And there's that. No worries. And he backed away and it's gone. Had I given that money, how do you think my chances would have been to get that back?
Not only not get it back, but every couple days there'd be a knock on your door or waiting for you outside, and it would amp up each time, because with people like that, they don't communicate. They on the same level, and they mark you. And that's what I think, the life isn't just violence. The life is also weaseling your way around things and lying and conning and getting your way, getting over and getting by. And he just marked you as an ATM, if you give into it.
And that's kind of what I wanted to say, is that, let's say that I have no experience with the life, and I'm just a regular guy, and the guy who lives with his cousin across the hall walks up to me. I'd have given him the money, and then all of a sudden you end up in that situation. You just explained that. Yeah, you're a resource to him.
Mm-hmm.
If you say yes, he's like, awesome, you're a resource. He's using all the marketing tricks that you learn in college if you study marketing, and it's going to be an emotional appeal, and it's going to be this and that, and it's a beautiful story that he paints, and he gets to the question, and eventually, by the time that he gets there, a lot of people just say, okay, because a lot of people feel self-conscious saying no, especially if it's a low number. It's like, could you give me $2, $3, $4, $5? You get to 10, it gets to be a little bit higher. But a lot of people are like, I don't want to be that guy. I'll just give it to him. And all of a sudden,
and that's intentional. That's very intentional, because there's two paths that could go. Either he can take what you said, no, I'm sorry, I had bad experiences, and he backs off. But if you say no to $3, it's a 50-50 whether or not you're going to get you fucking cheapskate, what, you too broke to give me $2? A challenge to your maturity and your economic status and your manhood and whatever. So once again, communication is currency, information is currency.
And that's why what I said at the end is that the way that I approached it was that I needed to send him a message, and also, let him save face. Like I said, and that's why I said, I don't know you. Mm-hmm. You might be a great guy. I said, you don't know me. Trying to communicate to him like, you don't know me. Maybe you should be cautious here. Mm-hmm. And I've had bad experiences with this, which is a valid reason that it's hard to find a counter for that. It's difficult. Yeah, well, what was that? I said, I'm not going to get into it. I've had bad experiences; they were bad. So hard pass this one. Vaya con Dios, and it closes it off, and we're done. And I didn't challenge him. He's free to go on his way, and he got the message that it's not working with that guy. Now he might decide, depending on how desperate he is, to try again. Eventually, he never did, but he disappeared a little while later anyway. So. The point that I wanted to make is that is a part of language. Is the way they talk to you, not just the vocabulary, not just the dialect or slang, but just the way they approach you. There, I wouldn't say always, but often there's a hustle going on. Could you talk a little bit about that part? I mean, we touched on it already a little bit, but I just want to have you talk a little bit more instead of me.
The hustle could be something as simple as making a sympathetic friend or witness. A hustle does not necessarily mean I'm getting something economic out of it, something financial out of it. I've hustled people just to have a calm, peaceful place to stay. People around my apartment or whatever. I act friendly to them, so they act more friendly to me. That way, I don't have any stress in my house. That's kind of a hustle. But yeah, you have to watch for. There's not very many tells and giveaways because they're not doing anything that's not normal for them. They're not conning you. That's just how they are. Um, I don't think it's hard for people to understand that. The classic movie con man kind of thing, it's a guy who puts up a front and I have, buy this my snake oil and you'll never have shingles again, right? Um, and then he goes and he's living his upper class life with all the money that he wrote. That's not how most hustles and cons happen. Most hustles and cons happen at the same exact level that person is actually at. That's them. It's not a hustle. Um, People who actively have hustles are easy to spot and they're easy to avoid. You remember Eddie Murphy, Trading Places.
Yes.
Where he's on that sled. That's what people think a hustle's going to be. What the hustle really is at the end of the movie where they screw over the two old guys because they're Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy are doing what they do. That's them. That's a real hustle, and it's more difficult to watch out for.
What would be a few of the myths, top of your head that you see people have about living the life? Some stuff that they get terribly wrong, whether it's things that you've read, you've seen people say whatever, or whether in movies, TV shows, whatever. I mean, something like, okay, folks, this is not true.
Well, there's so much.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but it's just this is one of the main things that I want to get across also in this interview of ours. It's just that it's hard to get good information about this. Like we said, there's the researchers who often don't understand who they're talking to. There's the people in the homeless economy is what I like to call it, who have a vested interest in keeping this going. And then there's TV and movies that show it in such a way that either glorifies it or sells a soppy story, or it gets us just totally wrong.
Most of it is, I've never run across anything that's totally, absolutely wrong. What happens is there's one thing that's right, and then all the supporting information that should go into that is wrong. So you have, I'm going to pick a homeless type situation. You have a guy who's on the street for 5 years, and he needs help. That's the surface story that you get on your news or your feel good homeless economy type person. What they don't tell you is that his family abandoned him because he kept on ripping him off. He's burned every bridge he's ever had, and that's why he's out there. And so you need to start helping him at a lower level. You need to start actually building actual survival and cultural skills back into him before you can make the big jump and give him a fucking apartment. That's the thing that pisses me off the most in the homeless thing, is this drive to give people homes before you solve the problems that put them where they are. Another one is like all the mythology around gangs, blood in, blood out. Yeah, in order to be a Crip, you have to kill somebody, or in order to be a Hell's Angel, you have to kill a cop. No, that adds to the romance and danger of the image. It's not. If that happened, think about it. There's 13,000 Hell's Angels clubs. If every one of them had to kill a cop to get patched, the numbers don't quite add up.
Yeah.
But it's there's so many misconceptions because in and of itself, the life is amorphous. Somewhere there is a club that you have to kill a cop to become a member of. I know it exists. It just has to, because the world's fucking weird. But you take that one example and try to make a blanket umbrella about it. That's where the disinformation, misinformation comes in. the life is made up of each individual that's in it. So there's no common ground. The only person I know that his experiences match mine enough to make me not a weirdo is Clint.
Yeah. And for the folks who don't know, I interviewed Clint right after Terry. That's winsblow.com/number 11. That's the episode after. That when I looked at the graphs of the statistic of the number of listeners, I call it the Clint direction, because you've got the steady graph and then you've got this spike of number of listeners going up and then back down again. So the Clint direction is a thing in the podcast.
Clint will be happy to hear that, the Clint direction. But he's the only one that I have enough commonalities with where I can make blanket statements. Everybody else that I knew in the life, we had one or two things in common, but they were their own person. It's like every culture, there's Belgian, right? Belgians. And y'all have a common, well, what, 3 common languages?
Yeah, the biggest part is 2, and we've got the biggest ethnic group is Flemish. That's what I am. We speak Dutch. Then you've got French-speaking, Brussels and Wallonia, and then a really small part of Germans, which we got as a compensation for the Second World War. Nice people, but they were forced to be Belgians. Imagine that.
Oh, yeah. When I was working for a particular company, I got in trouble when we were talking business plans and stuff, and I looked at them. You really want it? You think this is going to work? How the hell were you the people that tried to take over the world twice?
That went over well.
Oh yeah. But in getting back to it, the life is made up of so many different people, and like in Belgium, you have your common culture, but then you have people that they live above that, they live below that. It's all over the boards, and that's why it's such a mythological thing. My living in the life, while stereotypical, I think it might be a generational thing. Because there's Mark, there's Clint, there's me, there's Peyton, all kind of went the same general route. So generational and cultural probably make a bigger difference than even economic status. But there's no common ground. And so don't take anything somebody says or reads to heart as gospel truth. Just know that it's a little piece of the picture.
Yeah.
And that the rest of the picture is a lot fucking weirder than you'll ever imagine.
And a different question, and touching on the dark side a bit more. I'll go first. So maybe talk a little about some of the really dark figures that you meet. That people think that that's bullshit, that's only in the movies, or that is hard that you might never encounter in normal society. And for instance, the first time that I encountered basically a sociopath, psychopath, the distinction is in many ways difficult to make in his case. Killer. He was one of the best of his era professional gangsters. He lived life as a drug dealer in a different country and was, top of the food chain there. He went to prison for a long time because his outfit was infiltrated. Police officer got really close. He found out that was a police officer, slit his throat and dismembered him in the bathtub and made him disappear. Eventually got caught, spent his time, got out, came to Belgium, and just started doing bank robberies and heists of what do you call it? The trucks that transport the money and that kind of stuff, money trucks, valuables and so on. So pretty much at a point in time, whenever something happened of that sort in Belgium, you could be sure that he was involved in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I was training with a group of, fellow weirdos and bouncers and, special cases like that. And I'd been, they told me that, okay, so you can come in, this guy's there, and I gave it a backstory. And I met him, shook his hand. The best way to describe it is that if you just see him walking down the street, you wouldn't necessarily see anything out of the ordinary. But he knew why I was there. I was going to train with the group. And so he took the measure of me. And the best way that I can describe that is that it's like the look, the first look in his eyes that I saw when he put his eyes on me and shook my hand was like it was somebody looking through the scope of a rifle. That's the best way to describe it. There was no emotion. There was nothing. There was not even like, okay, how am I going to do, take this guy out? No, it's like he's already aimed. There's no way out for me. He just has to pull the trigger. That's all he has to do. Hard to describe for people who haven't experienced that, but it wasn't intimidation. It wasn't, trying to scare me or anything. It's just that it didn't even matter what I thought. He wasn't being disrespectful even. It's just that for him, that was like breathing. It's like, okay, boom, done. And I'll leave it at that. Could you maybe talk a little bit about some of the darker figures that you met? Again, as far as you're comfortable saying.
So one of the jobs I had at one point in time was actually running a halfway house, a transitional house for guys that just got out of prison and homeless people, and trying to integrate and get them back out in the world. And I actually became really friendly with one of them. And he didn't come from prison to the house. He was homeless and we brought him in. And we would sit in my room and watch TV because it was residential. I lived there and they all had on the top floor. And I would make sure he was back in his bunk before, no special treatment or anything, but we got along and we would talk and watch TV and stuff. And there used to be a TV show on America's Most Wanted. And they would talk about unsolved crimes, and this is who we think it was, and this is what he looks like. And we're sitting there watching it one night, and he's on the fucking show. And what he was on the show for was confronting a pastor in the pastor's house and beheading him with an axe in front of his family. And at that moment, I'm 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. And I'm a badass. I'm not that much of a badass. But I looked over at him. He looked at me and he goes, "You know what I have to do now, don't you?" And in that second, I thought, "Oh, fuck." And I'm getting ready. I'm reaching over for, an equalizer. And goes, "I have to leave. I can't stay here. This shit's going to follow me for the rest of my life." And he left.
Yeah.
And just what you were talking about, that calm, that
Yeah.
it didn't, there was no threat. The whole threat was in my imagination that he was going to try to kill me, because that, especially being younger and more naive,
Yeah.
I thought, oh, fuck, it's going to go just like a movie and he's going to try to, and I'm going to have to valiant fight for my life. No, I have to leave, which is generally most people's answer to shit is I have to leave. But when that episode came on, the emotion left, the eyes went blank, and he didn't feel bad for what he did, but he wasn't proud of it either. It was just something that happened. And then when he looked at me, I was like, oh, fuck, my dick shrank, I've met some one of the worst people I ever met was actually a female. And she would do her thing, she'd go around and have sex with whoever she wanted to. And then every once in a while, she would just claim that somebody raped her. And go through the whole thing and either ruin the guy's reputation or get him put in jail or whatever, because she was bored.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason she did it. I was involved in the rescue of a couple infants who were being horribly abused. And the father and mother never saw what was wrong with what they were doing and actually got mad at me for breaking into their house to get their kids out, because I ruined their family.
Yeah.
Now, the conditions when I broke in, there was shit and no food. There was shit on the floor, dirty diapers. The windows were boarded up. The doors were covered with mattresses and stuff, so the kids could. And they were little kids. They were like 2 and 3 years old. And the whole anger was at me for breaking up their family. The mom was mad at me for breaking up their family. That's a level of fucking weird I still don't understand. And that ranks as one of the most evil things I've ever seen.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, when a lot of people hear a story in the news about, child abuse like that, and like, oh, this is horrible. Yeah, but it's something else when you're actually face to face with both the victims and the perpetrators. And like you said, seeing them like, I do nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with this.
Hmm.
This is not a crime. And to them, it just doesn't enter into their mind that what they're doing to that child is just traumatizing in a way that is hard for anybody else to comprehend if they haven't
Some of the
lived through it.
stories that Clint has from where he works now, ugh,
Yeah. Yeah, it gets really dark in the life. And that's why I wanted to, I mean, to not, make everybody depressed, but we talked about the quote unquote good part, in the sense that the fun part maybe is a better way to describe it. Like, woohoo, you can have drugs, nobody cares, do your thing, and you can push on, so go beyond certain limits that would get you in trouble in regular society. And if you're in the life, that's fine. And that is attractive. But like you said, slippery slope. You go a little bit too far. Somebody like you or somebody else tries to tell you, like, hey, dude, cool your jets a little bit. You might want to slow
mm-hmm.
down. And you blow past that point, and all of a sudden you start getting, to the point where somebody will actually do something about it. And if you go past that, and eventually you get to the point where there's really dark figures out there who will do really, really bad things to you and your loved ones and anybody else. And it doesn't matter. So there's this kind of scale upon which the life, I think, can be seen. With the tricky part being that you might not notice it when all of a sudden you went like, 5 steps closer to the
Mm-hmm.
dark side. And I think that's a difficult thing to understand for people.
I think that kind of happened with me. I didn't realize how far down that I was going,
Yeah.
you know. And going back to our talk about language, how it shows where you're from. I was really frustrated at work one day, and I leaned into a coworker's office, and I said, "Have you ever wanted to fucking headbutt somebody until their brains turn to jelly?" To me, that's a fucking normal statement. To them, not so much, you know. I didn't realize how far down that road of violence I had gone until significant events happened.
Yeah.
And even to this day, one of the bad parts about having been in the life is violence is usually the first thing that pops into my head to solve a problem.
Yeah.
You know,
How long has it been since you kind of left the life?
okay, so I'm going to be 54 this year. My first big straight up attempt at getting out of the life and leaving it actively was when I was 29,
Yeah.
which happens to coincide with when I met Jay. Um, the last, what he backslide and trying to get out of it was in 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
And I kind of went way off the rails in 2014.
So it's been almost 10 years now. So and
Mm-hmm.
and the reason I ask is that, like you said, the first response is still anger
Mm-hmm.
and violence. And this is one of the ways in which it manifests. I think maybe throughout life, if you've lived either too deep into the life or for too long, or both, whatever, is that certain things don't change. And somebody we both know, and I won't name him because it's his story to tell. He once mentioned in passing somewhere, and he said, I still think like a thief. It's been decades, but I still think like a thief. It's just still there, and
Mm-hmm.
he was getting up there in age at that point already. And I think that's something that is also difficult to understand for people for whom all this is purely theoretical, is that what it takes to survive and thrive, maybe even in the life, is like Liam Neeson says, a particular set of skills that most
Yeah.
people don't have. You learn them the hard way usually, um, but the way you need to be able to use those skills means that they have to be ingrained to a certain level that it's going to be really difficult getting rid of them. Really difficult.
Yeah.
So that brings me kind of to the the final part before we get to the Patreon episode, the bonus episodes. Let's talk a little bit about getting out of the life. So you mentioned that there were a few things that kind of triggered that. What was maybe the first moment that gave you that kind of awakening of like, okay, I can't do this anymore?
Okay, so a little bit of a brag on this one. This story inspired Barry Eisler to write one of the Rain books.
Excellent. Could you mention which one? So I'm going to put it in the
I
show
don't
notes.
remember. He changed the titles of them.
Right. Okay, I'll ask him.
But I think it was the original. I think was Killing Rain when he was in the Philippines.
Okay, I'll ask him and I'll look it up.
But since he changed the titles got changed, I can't remember what book it was. But so I was working the door at the landing strip, and done this for a decade, right? I'm not a cherry. I'm not a newbie. I know what I'm doing. But Jay and I had started dating. I had met her. She was a bartender there, and fell in love, the whole 9 yards. And my life is going fucking fantastic at this point. And so I have to walk this guy out of the bar, and he turns around and he's, I'm going to kick your ass. And normally I deal with it. I froze. I wasn't scared. I wasn't, what do I do? I froze. And it wasn't until much later, the situation got resolved. Somebody helped me and I snapped back into it. But talking with Barry actually helped me understand what happened. And Mark helped me a lot with this one, because at that point I was on the payphone. This is how long ago it was. I was on the payphone with Mark whenever what the fuck? What's this? I had something that was worth living for, whereas before I didn't care.
Yeah.
And that's what caused me to freeze. That was one of the first steps. One of them actually happened about several years before, but it didn't mature until after I had gone with Jay. My daughter, I used to go pick her up for visits, because you don't have a very stable family life when you're in the life, right? I would go pick her up for visits, and one day she asked me, can you promise that you're not going to get in a fight or get in trouble? My daughter is about 3 or 4 years old at that point. And that, yeah, sure, no problem. But then years later, it dawned on me what that meant and what she had seen. And that caused actually a lot of guilt. Those two things, meeting Jay and falling in love and realizing what I had done to my kids, were the impetus to try to get out. And then I realized that I'm on my own worth getting out of it and living a better life for. But I think there was those necessary steps before I could reach that level where I knew that I could do it for me. And that also had something to do with like my backslide in 2014 when I went off the rails, is I had to relearn that I could do it just for me.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had a support group, people helping you out.
Still do. To this day, I still do.
Yeah. How instrumental were they in a sense that, let me rephrase that. Imagine somebody hears this and is like, okay, my friend, boyfriend, husband, wife, whatever, family member isn't alive, wants to get out. I want to help them. Are there some do's and don'ts that you can say to those people?
Don't patronize them. Don't condescend to them, but don't buy their bullshit. There's going to be, when you start stepping out of it, whether it's going clean from being a drug addict, stopping a violent lifestyle, whatever it is, there's going to be parts of yourself that are fighting with each other. And sometimes that part that wants to still be in the life will take over, and it will lie to the person, right to their face, of the person trying to help you. And that's why, to the person who's trying to help, don't buy the bullshit. You have to have rules that you stick by. You have to have lines that won't be crossed, or you're going to walk away. Because your life is your life. You're trying to help this person get out of another life, and that's fucking wonderful, and I love that. But don't sacrifice your life for theirs. I know a lot of fucked up, sad stories about people trying to help other people out and getting fucked over or getting killed or getting raped or getting, don't do that. draw your boundaries. Don't have boundaries that you will not let people cross. Or have boundaries you will not let people cross. That's the most important thing. And also realize that no matter what you do, and this goes back to what you said in the opening of this, until that person knows they need to change and wants to make a change, nothing you do is going to help. And don't feel guilty about that. Feel guilty if you ignore the person after they ask for help, if that's your gig. But if they don't want help, and quite possibly they're just using your arm for, they're using your house to hide away from the cops, so to speak, don't feel guilty if they don't really want help, because you can't do anything for them. Those are the two biggest things.
Yeah, and it's not easy, obviously, for a lot of people. I mean, if it's a loved one, you see them just sliding in deeper and deeper, and you want to help. It's really tough seeing somebody you care for ending up in the life, and you can see that they're just, it's an accident waiting to happen, and you're in a large part helpless, unless, like you said, when they ask, okay, and you're there, but with the caveats that you mentioned. I think in a large part it's also that you kind of have to be lucky that, for instance, the moment that person is ready to try to leave life, that they haven't burned so many bridges with you already that you're still in a position to actually say, you know what, I'm going to give you this chance, and I'm going to stand by you. I know of somebody that is dear to me who, when he was younger, I mean, he completely dove into the life, was extremely aggressive, and ended up just getting kicked out of the house, with police showing up, and was like, you don't go into this house anymore. You've lost your home. Dealing drugs, doing drugs, and so on, and basically, messing up his brain in the process, obviously. But he eventually got out of it, and I asked him, so what triggered it? And he said, yeah, well, some of the bigger drug dealers came to me and said that you're not working here anymore. And the message was very clear, is that you can try and next time, and that'll be the end of it. And that put kind of fear in him, that he understood that he needed, is like, okay, yeah, this I need to get out right now, or eventually I'll be dead. Whether it's this guy or somebody else. I mean, so that what I mentioned before, this is one of the examples, is that the fun side of the life, and then the extreme darkness. All of a sudden, you didn't know you were getting that close to the darkness, and all of a sudden, this guy from the darkness comes walking up to you and said, "Hey, dude, this is as far as you go. One more step, and we're ending you." This is not a discussion. This is not a negotiation. This is me telling you. And you see a guy who drops the scope eyes on you, and like, and if you don't get the message, okay, that'll be it. And he got out of that. He's fully clean now. We talked about that, and he said, sometimes I see one of those guys that was kind of in his group and that are still in the life, and he's like, I'll talk to them, say hi, and they'll ask me to go have a drink, and I'll say no. I says, I'm not mad at you, but I'm out. I'm not coming back in. And he's been clean for a really long time now, and he's married. He's got a good job. He's got he's got a good relationship. He's got his house and all that. It's great, and so far so good. He's basically gotten out of there. Go ahead.
I have to step out for a minute.
Okay, I'm gonna make a note. All right. Yep. Go ahead.
I do want to go back to what you were talking about leaving the life and the people that you used to know and stuff.
Yeah. And the reason I mentioned that story is just as an example of, like, there's very often these kind of triggering events, or somebody says something happens. I mean, when there's a part of my life when I went off the rails a little bit after my divorce, and some bad stuff happened that I'm not going to go into. But at a certain point, I almost killed somebody. And the only thing that stopped me is that, I think it was the year before, I was at Market Barbecue, and Bear Stern came up to me, and he said that, and I don't know why, and he said, you're going to have to be careful, because if you don't control yourself, you're going to kill somebody. I never knew why he said that, but for some reason it stuck with me. And I was just about to go for the guy's firearm, grab it and shoot him with it, and double tap him. And the way I learned, this is old school stuff, but flash image result is that you have these mini scenarios that this is what I'm going to do, 1, 2, 3 steps, and so on. And it was the strangest experience for me that it was as if I was watching myself in the third person.
Mhm.
That I was almost screaming and yelling at that guy, and I was watching myself at the same time, and I could see myself positioning myself to get the firearm, and was just about to go when I heard Stern's voice saying that to me again. And that's what, and I was, I didn't, there was no substance abuse or anything, but I was sick. I didn't know. I was basically
Yeah,
not
I
sleeping.
understand that one a lot.
I didn't know what was going on with my body, but it was breaking down. I was dying from the inside out. Everything was breaking down. Sleep deprived for months and months on end, and so on. Bunch of stuff going on, and that it clicked, and I could clearly see what I was doing. Stuff. I would have killed him in the next second, and there's no doubt in my mind that I would have succeeded because he was not aware of what was going on. He did. It was a police officer. He didn't know what I was doing or what I was setting him up. That much was clear. And I immediately started de-escalating the situation and apologizing. And that guy probably thinks that I'm the biggest asshole out there. But I realized how close I came to just fucking up my life forever
Mhm.
and that of my children for all the wrong reasons. Because it was total bullshit on my part. But I was so far gone at that point as that, no. And I'd worked for many, many decades already at that point in my life to not be a violent asshole, because that is my temperament. I am extremely volatile. That's my temperament. I've always have been. Very quick to anger. Most people don't believe me when I say that because they don't see it. It's just because I've been fucking working like crazy to not show that. And
Yeah.
I do my best to be polite and do my best to give people 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chances, because my first instinct is just to rip their head off. I don't want to be that guy because I know where that ends.
Yeah.
So the point was that was for me the triggering event. Like, you're gonna have to sort your shit out because this is not ending well. And that was when it and that was the first trigger. And then I went to Phoenix to see Slug. Slug invited me over and said, come stay with me because he passed away a few years ago. So I might eventually talk about him some more. There's
Mhm.
his kids, there's his family, there's his wife. There's
Yeah.
reasons why I don't do that, but a bunch of people know who I'm talking about. And when he said, come stay with me for a while, I think it'll be good for you. And it was the first time that I could actually start breathing again, which is hard to explain sometimes to people, but for a long time I couldn't breathe. And I remember the first day I landed in Phoenix, he picked me up, said, let's take this ride. This is a fun view. We went up one of the, not mountains, but one of the bigger hills where you have the view of Phoenix from all the way up top. And it was gorgeous. It was the sun was setting. And I remember, like, okay, all this bullshit going on in my life, and look at this here. This is gorgeous. This is peace and quiet. And I could actually feel myself breathing, and some attention went out. Stay with him for a while, and then we had this talk, and because of his background, obviously. Anyway, we're not going to get into that, but he said to me at one point, one of the discussions when that was pivotal for me, is when he said, the darkness doesn't own you. And I think for me, that was like, obviously, of course, we all know that, but at that point in time, that's what really pulled me out. I said, okay, if Slug says the darkness doesn't own you, then it doesn't own you, because he fucking
Bug
knows.
was one of the people who actually was one of my support group for a while. And, he told me something similar. He goes, what makes you think you're not worth
Yeah.
living how you want to.
He was good at like that.
Yeah. And I it's one of those things that is such an obvious fucking statement, but when you hear it in that space and in that headspace, it's you're hitting a wall and you're like, yeah. Doesn't mean it's easy after that, but yeah, I miss Slug.
Yeah, me too.
His kid and his daughter-in-law were actually coming to train with me for a while when we were still in Denver.
Yeah, it's one of the few things that I'm very happy about that I did in life is that I actually went to see him and stayed at his house for a couple of days with my girlfriend because I wanted her to meet him. I think it was 2 years before he passed, and I'm getting emotional because
Yeah.
And I remember us driving away, and I look back, and he does this. The response was I told my girlfriend right away, and the way he looked at me when he did that was like, we're never going to see each other again. And you know how this stuff goes, and how it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but it's, to this day, it's one of the few things that I'm very happy about, that I got to see him, we got to talk, I got to show her who he was, what he means to me, and that it didn't that we managed to do that before he unfortunately passed. And I think that's one of the things that's so hard to explain to people who have not had experiences like you've had, and to a much lesser degree I have had, is that how incredibly strong these kind of triggering moments can be, not just necessarily for what happens, but for who it happens with. Like you mentioned, your daughter, you're really like, fuck. And she says that to you as a 3-year-old, like when you realize, like, when it hits you like a sledgehammer, what that actually means. Or when it's somebody of Slug's caliber who says to you, is like, why do you think you're not worth living? I mean, that kind of stuff is an important part, I think, of managing to get out of the life.
And it when you just got emotional, it made me have a really, really big realization of something I had thought about before. When you get out of the life, you have to be ready to be sad a lot, because you're turning your back on everything that you were before. But what's worse, and I had this experience a few times, and occasionally, because like Facebook and stuff, somebody that I knew from back then will try to be my friend, send me a friend request, and I can't accept it. It's like you said, you can't go back to that. And those people were there then. And even if they've changed, we're not the same people anymore.
Yeah.
But you're abandoning what you thought was your family. And that's where a lot of the issues that people have come in. Yeah, there's no honor among thieves, but there is. It's just not the same kind as what you're led to believe and what you were brought up to believe if you're not in that. And those emotional connections actually can run a lot deeper.
Yeah.
There is, back in, I want to say 1994, 93, there is a biker bar in Colorado Springs, and a guy got shot in it. The bar is named Gemini. And the guy who got shot was really popular. A lot of us knew him. He had given me a hand a few times getting stuff done. And the amount of people who showed up for the memorial run, which, if you're not aware of that, everybody gets on their bikes and rides. It was a 5-mile long column. And guys who didn't cry when their old lady left them, guys that didn't cry when their kids left the house, they didn't cry at their mother's wedding, cried at his memorial. That, it's deep, and it's hard to get out of, because you don't feel that same connection the only, and this is almost like I cheated. I tripped into a good group of people. It wasn't because of me. I tripped and took a wrong turn. Mark beat my ass when I was a teenager somehow, you know. I tripped into a group of people that were better than what I was leaving because they had the same kind of experiences or understanding that I did, but they weren't going to twist it and use it. And they helped me, and that was my support group. So even with that, it was hard for me to leave the other people behind.
No, makes perfect sense. Something else I want to touch on is that the example I'll give is weight loss. Many people say that I want to lose weight, and then I want to lose 20 pounds, whatever, it doesn't matter, number doesn't matter. And then they lose the first 3 pounds, and that goes really fast, and it's great. And then it starts slowing down, it's difficult. And then they gain a few pounds back, and then it goes down again. And there's this whole roller coaster ride until they either quit or they eventually get to that point. If you were to plot a graph, it would not be a straight line. It would be all over the place. And that's a guy made a meme out of that. And this is what I show clients, like, okay, you want to lose weight, this is how it's going to go. I can imagine that leaving the life is pretty similar in that regard. Or,
oh yeah, a little bit.
because you mentioned before, like you thought, like, I'm just going to switch and it'll be over. So could you talk a little bit about the roller coaster, just getting to where you are now? However you want to answer that.
So, not surprisingly, being in the life I had a drug problem for quite a while, and I quit. I went clean, and I was still working in bars and everything. And I ended up working open to close like 6 days a week at the bar, which, for those uninitiated, a bar opens at 11 and closes at 2, and then you have to clean. So I was there for quite a fucking long time every day, and I got really fucking tired. And I know how to fix this, and right. And I got fired by a drug addict general manager because he was disappointed in me for going back to doing drugs.
That's irony for you.
He hired me back because I am what I am, but I got fired for doing drugs by somebody who, when he fired me, had a ring.
For the people who don't understand why we're laughing, I'm sorry, but it's funny.
And I remember one time, this was probably within the last 10 years. I'm going along, I'm doing my normal thing and whatnot, and I get in a slight confrontation with somebody, and the next thing I know, I'm grabbing them. And I'm like, oh, nope, sorry, I was wrong. And I left because not only did I almost trigger something that I don't know how it would have ended, I embarrassed myself. And that's one of the things that you never realize that you're going to face is embarrassing yourself. You know, it's a giant roller coaster. And sometimes you have to go through that same loop to loop like 7 times before you learn the lesson. Nothing's a straight path, but it is interesting. And it's fun. I've had more fun in my life since I left that than I did while I was in that.
No.
And that's hard for me to believe, considering some of the things I did there. But I really have, and I met a lot more interesting characters and people. So there's always hope, and when you realize. I like the description of the roller coaster thing because it makes you realize that you're on a track, you're on a trail, and you're moving. It's just here and there and yawing and pitching and whatnot. And if you can realize that while you're doing it, it helps you keep focus on the end line. And that was probably the biggest thing I had to learn, is that the goal is what's important. The little followaways and stuff, unless you go too far with it, those don't matter as much.
Yeah. Now, we talked about, relapsing basically and going back into the life, which kind of begs the question is, when do you realize that you're actually out? When do you consider like you've gone through the roller coaster ride, but you got off the ride, you're out? It's not an easy question, I know.
No, it's not. And the quick and kind of snappy answer is when I turned down a job. But that's not quite the full answer. I had probably not consciously realized I was out of the life at that point, but somebody offered me money to do something I was perfectly capable and comfortable doing. And I said no. And I think that was my first actual break with it where I knew. But like the story about freezing at the door trying to throw that guy out, that was a little bit of a glitch that showed me that I was on my way out. I hadn't made the conscious choice to leave yet, but my heart and mind had decided I was leaving. Um, Honestly, there wasn't any one real event. I just woke up and realized I'm not that anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't have the same goals. I didn't have the same motivations. I didn't have the same desires and needs to live that life. I had a life I was happy with now. And I don't think I'm like really a part of mainstream society still, but I'm not different in the same way I used to be different.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is because it's obviously an ongoing process, and obviously relapsing is something you're going to have to pay attention to. And I've got one more question along those lines. But I think this is something that most people can relate to, and that's kind of what inspired my question. Is that, for instance, when I went through my divorce, it was pretty bad, and Lauren Christensen actually, I mean, he helped me through that tremendously. Also, he's like, come on over to my place, and I went spend some time with him, talked a lot. I have a lot of fond memories of just instead of going to bed like normal people, we were like, okay, let's go to bed after a long talk in the living room. And on the way to the bedrooms in the hallway, we'd spend another hour talking, and
Mm-hmm.
mainly him trying to talk sense into me, and me being a dumbass, and being very grateful that that he did what he did for me. But one of the things he said is that, and at the moment it's so difficult to see when you're in the middle of all that shit. He said, there's going to be a day that you wake up and you realize that, wow, I haven't thought about her at all yesterday. Or you go to bed at night and you're like, I haven't thought about her all day. And he said, that's kind of the point, the turning point of when you get over the failure of that relationship. And it says, it can take a year, it can take a few years, but that's usually what it tends to be. And I found that for a lot of people, that is actually true. So that's something that listeners who went through divorce can actually maybe relate to a little bit better, depending on how their divorce went. Um, but that's kind of why I ask, is that there must be some point where you kind of realize, and it doesn't have to be a specific point in time, but eventually, like you said, you figure out like, okay, I'm, maybe not normal quote unquote person in society, but you're no longer that guy who's living
Mm-hmm.
life either. And that brings me to my final question before we go to the bonus segment is, what do you do to try to avoid, slipping back in and falling off the wagon and going back to the
I live a boring life.
life?
No, seriously. My whole goal in life is to get home to Jay and have a nice dinner and chill out at home. Having that as a goal really helps me focus on. But it's the law of the three S's: don't do stupid shit around stupid people in stupid places. It really is that simple. I used to argue, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's that fucking simple. Unless you trip the trigger of some mega predator, you're not going to get in trouble if you're at home. You know, but yeah, I have to watch my temper a lot. What's worse is I have to watch my sense of humor, because my sense of humor will start more shit than my temper will. Um, and realizing that my brain doesn't quite work like other people's do. And so what seems to me like a logical and reasonable thing to say verbally doesn't come across that way to other people, which also can cause a lot of problems and misinterpretations, and that can lead to some kinetic conversations. But no, it's an everyday process, and I found a really good blueprint is following like the basic Judeo-Christian ethos mixed with stoicism, meditations with Marcus Aurelius and all that.
Which, by the way, for the listener, if you haven't read that, read it. I mean, it's a few thousand years old, but if you read it, and it kind of depends on because you've got really archaic translations as well, and that's not the one. So you might have to do some looking, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But Stoicism, and meditations in particular, it's just fundamental wisdom on how to live your life, that you don't have to follow it all, you don't have to agree with everything, but you could do a whole lot of fucking worse than following it.
I thought the Book of Five Rings, as far as like a life book and strategies, sucked balls. But I found Marcus Aurelius, and then through that, other Stoicism authors, and that mixed with like the on the ground discussion of philosophy that we would have every summer or whatever. Really, watch your temper. Don't do something that's going to embarrass you or your people. Is what I'm doing right now helping me meet my goals or my family's goals? And can I look at myself in the mirror in the morning if I do this? That's my daily.
Yeah. Well, one that always helps for me is just, I don't want to put my kids through this. I don't want them to see me like that. And they've only once seen me lose my temper, not really at them, but at somebody else. There was no violence at all or anything, but that I was actually shouting and basically intimidating somebody because something that happened with my daughter. I think that's the only time they actually saw me. Basically, I wouldn't say completely lose it, but that I let my anger go. Usually I don't. I was like, no. This time I felt justified. Is you're going to get the full brunt of my anger. And given that I've got a grave digger's face when I'm angry, it's apparently not a fun experience for most people. But that's a big part of what helps for me in kind of staying level is that I don't want my kids to see me like that.
The other thing that works for me is I always have something to look forward to. I might not know what that is, but I always have something to look forward to. I was teaching a seminar in California, in Oakland, as a matter of fact. And a particular morning, somebody told me that someone's coming to see me, but they wouldn't tell me who it was. That's an example of something to look forward to that you don't have to know about. And for those who are wondering, it was fucking Wim who was in California with Barry Eisler. It was fucking awesome. But, the chocolates never made it home. They melted, so I ate them.
You got them right. You should have eaten it. God damn it. No, so for the people who don't know, so this is I think that was the first Violence Dynamics, right? I'm not sure.
The first one in Oakland.
Okay. So Oakland's not that far from where Barry is, and I visit Barry usually once a year. And I think I contacted Maya or Rory. I'm not sure anymore. I heard afterwards that Rory was saying to everybody, I've got a secret. No.
Yep.
I'm like, okay. And so the whole idea was that Barry made contact with Mark and everybody. Is like, oh, where will you be and this and that? But nobody knew that I was going to be there. So you guys were doing this exercise with people. You had to kind of put like a playing card in somebody's back or something, back pocket, whatever. And you were smack in the middle of the exercise, and I'd spotted you, and I was hiding behind Barry and my girlfriend, and I think you saw Barry first, and then I stepped behind him, and I think this is the only time that I saw you just your mouth dropped right open, like, oh, what is this? And
yeah.
like, yes, got him. And then Mark had the same thing. Barry, I think either you called somebody or somebody else said something, and oh, Barry's here. Mark, come on over. Mark came on over, gave Barry a hug, and I was a little bit behind Barry, so Mark was looking my direction, and I pop in front of him. He's like, and Barry says like, he kind of stiffened, like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So I had that. I don't pull pranks on people, like be an asshole, because I hate that. I don't want to be like that. But this is I think a fun prank. Like, okay,
yeah.
This guy from across the world suddenly shows up to say hi to his friends.
But yeah, but the point of why I brought that, other than it's one of my favorite memories ever, is you have to have shit to look forward to, but don't put it in concrete what it is that you're looking forward to. I would never have imagined that happy of a day, you know? But I think it brings up the importance, and maybe this might be better for later, but you have to develop shit worth living for to get out of what you were living before. And my people are a big part of that for me.
Yeah, and at a certain point, I think you also have to become, um, there's this meme going around. There's a guy who looks all depressed, and he says, "Nobody gives a fuck about me." And then the next panel is a guy who's laughing his ass off, and he's so happy. Nobody gives a fuck about me. And like it's the same sentence, but it's your mindset that goes with it. We're only here for a very short amount of time, given the overall scheme of things. Like one of my clients used to say, our lives here are like a blip in a timeline, but it's so small you can't even see it on the scale of infinity. So you kind of have to think about how you want to spend that time. And if you're like, fuck society, I'm out. I'm like, okay, it's valid. You can make that choice. But like we talked about, it might be difficult. It might not be them, like you said. You might have more fun in a quote unquote regular life as opposed to in the life. Go ahead.
I don't know if I call it a regular life, but yeah.
Yeah, well,
I realize that. So I for the first time in a long time, we're being here and talking to people who I don't really know and all that kind of stuff. I realize how fucking outside of things our lives are.
Yeah.
I
was the guy I mentioned before, who was, kicked out of the house and selling drugs. And a while ago, he was having a little bit of trouble. So I went to see him and talked a little bit. And he said, I feel like an outsider. All the bullshit that everybody's talking about, it's just bullshit to me and this and that. And he was not going off the rails, but he wasn't in a good place. And I said, dude, that's exactly how I feel. Nobody cares about the stuff that I care. Nobody is interested in what I do, because I typically don't talk about the conversation that we have within my family, with my in-laws. We don't talk about that because they'll look at me as like I'm this crazy guy who does this, martial arts self-defense stuff, blog, podcast. What the hell is Wim doing? We don't talk about that stuff. They live regular civilian lives, and it's fine. I mean, both these people, it's fine. But a lot of the things that and I don't. It sounds pejorative when I say regular citizens. I'm not looking down on anybody. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that the things we talk about is a reality of life that is very far removed from their daily life. So it's normal that they don't talk about it, and vice versa. I mean, if you are in the life, as we've been talking about, some of the things that regular citizens are worried about, that's not your concern. That's never on your radar. And that doesn't mean their bullshit or their problems isn't valid. But there is a level of sometimes superficialness in modern in civil society, and that was what he was having trouble with. And I said, look, I get it. You can't talk. You feel like you can't talk to anybody. I said, I'm here. You can talk to me whenever you want. But I mean, that's my life too. That I'm sitting at a dinner conversation and I'm like, this is the most empty, vapid stuff that we're talking about. But this is life for everybody sitting here, and it's valid as well. I don't find it necessarily particularly interesting. And I might want to talk about something else that I just saw, or a video that I saw, or an article that I read, or a talk that I had, like I had with you. That they won't get it. They're going to look at me as like, what?
Yeah.
So anyway, that was what I wanted to say, is that, like you said, living a regular life is maybe not what you do, but it's maybe more regular than it used to be.
Yeah, it's better. It's definitely better. There's no question I wouldn't trade it.
Excellent. I think this is a good place to kind of wrap it up. And maybe, if you've still got time, head for the bonus segment on Patreon, because my patrons have a few questions for you as well.
Do you mind if I go smoke a cigarette real quick?
Sure. But
And
before
then we'll pick it back up?
yeah, before we do, maybe wrap it up here. Is there somewhere online that people can contact you if or whatever, you have a website, web presence, anything?
Not at the moment. I'm actually actively trying to build a website, and I'm going to start a Patreon page soon.
Okay, cool.
But Facebook is probably the easiest.
Okay. Well, whenever you're ready, I'll shout it out, and I'll add it in the show notes here. Then I can do that afterwards. We'll figure it out when that happens. Okay. All right. Cool. So for the folks who have been listening to us, thank you for staying with us. Terry, thank you tremendously for taking the time and sharing all this. And when you get back from your smoke, we are heading straight into the bonus segment. I'll put a link in the show notes to that part as well. That is bound to be at least as interesting as what we just talked about.
All righty then. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right, folks, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next time.